March 12, 1945. A bitter wind swept across the Atlantic as a convoy of transport ships approached the port of New York. On board, a small group of German women POWs, mostly nurses, clerical staff, and a few auxiliary support workers, peered cautiously through the portholes. Their faces were pale, marked by months of rationed food, cramped quarters, and the ever-present tension of a world at war. They had been told to expect hardship, muddy fields, overworked guards, and perhaps even cruelty. What they found instead was something almost absurd in its contrast. As the gangplanks lowered, the women stepped onto American soil for the first time, blinking against a landscape that seemed pulled from a storybook rather than a battlefield. Expansive green fields stretched beyond orderly rows of barracks, the sun glinting off trucks parked in neat formations, and a distant mess hall sent the smell of baked bread and coffee drifting on the wind. A guard, standing straight backed and surprisingly cheerful, greeted them with words they did not expect. Polite, almost courteous. I thought we would face punishment, but they handed us blankets, one woman later recalled in an archived interview, her voice trembling between disbelief and incredulity. Warm blankets, not like the ones we had in Germany, that smelled of wet wool and fear. Here was the first jarring contrast, expectation versus reality. These women had anticipated despair, scarcity, and suspicion at every turn. Instead, they found order, cleanliness, and a note of irony they could scarcely suppress, comfort. Some of the nurses even exchanged incredulous glances over the neatly arranged bunks. One muttered under her breath, "Do they think we're royalty?" The United States had, by 1945, become home to more than 370,000 Axis POWs, scattered across nearly 500 camps in 46 states. Female prisoners were a tiny minority, perhaps a few hundred, but their presence was no less significant. They were witnesses to a system unlike anything they had imagined. Humane treatment enshrined not just in policy, but in practice. Guards enforced discipline, yes, but they also handed out reading materials, scheduled recreational activities, and, even more startling, smiled. And the provisions. Here, for the first time, many of these women tasted food in quantities and qualities unimaginable back home. Fresh milk, eggs, even occasional fruit. Some POWs later admitted that their first sight of a fully stocked refrigerator made them suspicious, as though it were a trick designed to lure them into compliance. The irony was not lost on them. They were prisoners, yet they had more comfort than some civilians enduring bombed-out cities in Europe. The shock extended beyond material abundance. The air itself seemed different, crisp, infused with pine from nearby forests, mingling with the faint scent of cooking fires and freshly tilled soil. Even the cadence of American speech struck them as peculiar, polite, measured, and remarkably non-threatening. These were not the harsh, barking commands they had been trained to obey. These were voices that seemed to speak to humanity rather than fear. One nurse, Maria, later recalled standing in the camp's parade ground, notebook in hand, recording her impressions. She wrote, "I cannot comprehend this. They treat us with dignity, yet we are prisoners. It is as if the world has shifted while we slept." That mixture of awe, suspicion, and subtle humor, acknowledging the absurdity of feeling cared for while shackled, defined the first hours of arrival. By the end of the day, the women began to realize that they had entered not just a military camp, but a carefully orchestrated paradox, a place where captivity coexisted with comfort, where order replaced chaos, and where even the smallest kindness carried the quiet power to unsettle assumptions forged in war. They had crossed an ocean, expecting hardship, and instead found themselves confronted by the unfamiliar question, is this really possible? Little did they know, the surprises were only beginning. What awaited them in the days ahead would challenge not just their expectations, but their very understanding of what it meant to be a prisoner of war. The morning after their arrival, The German women POWs began to notice details that further unsettled their expectations. The camp, far from the grim barracks and overworked guards they had imagined, seemed almost civilized. Mess halls filled with the aroma of freshly baked bread, the sizzle of eggs, and the occasional tang of coffee, a luxury many of them had gone months without. Each meal was carefully measured, yet abundant, served on proper plates with cutlery. Some women later admitted in interviews that they spent the first few days silently marveling at the very act of being served, as if it were a form of subtle magic. Daily routines were structured, yes, but not oppressive. The women were assigned chores, laundry, gardening, basic camp maintenance, but always with dignity and a degree of choice. Unlike the rigid hierarchies they had endured under the Wehrmacht or in labor camps, here they could volunteer for activities, even small pleasures like knitting or sewing. In one corner of the camp, a group of nurses had set up a small knitting circle. They laughed quietly as they compared yarn colors, their hands moving nimbly, the rhythm soothing in a way that reminded them of home. One of them joked to her friend, "I feel more like a guest at a summer retreat than a prisoner of war." Education and vocational training were offered to many POWs. American authorities believed that providing structure and mental engagement could reduce unrest. Women could attend English classes, study first aid, or even learn trades that might help them once they returned home. For some, this was startling. A prisoner allowed to improve herself instead of being punished for survival. Archival letters capture the astonishment. One woman wrote, "They give us lessons. I am learning English, but also learning that we are not enemies in every small thing." Recreation further accentuated the surreal contrast. Sports, music, and theater performances were encouraged. A weekly camp bulletin would announce talent shows or small concerts, where POWs could participate or simply watch. Some performed skits in their native German, while Americans clapped politely, creating a strange blend of camaraderie and captivity. The juxtaposition was nearly comical. Guards in uniform laughing alongside women they were technically detaining, sharing moments of joy that war had trained them to see as impossible. Even the work itself carried hints of comfort. Gardens thrived under the hands of POWs, the scent of soil and growing vegetables filling the air. Women were allowed to tend chickens, collect eggs, and even harvest produce for their own meals. The sheer abundance, the smell of fresh herbs, the warmth of sun on their backs, stood in sharp contrast to the scarcity and grime of wartime Germany. A POW nurse later recalled watching a patch of tomatoes ripen and thinking, "I had forgotten that life could grow so freely." Yet, underlying this abundance was a persistent awareness of captivity. Guards remained vigilant, and strict rules governed movement beyond the camp. Letters home were censored. Identities and roles were monitored. This paradox, the comfort paired with constraint, kept the women alert, balancing appreciation with caution. Humor surfaced as a coping mechanism. One German woman, upon discovering that she could request an extra slice of bread, quipped to a friend, "Is this the enemy, or have we entered some benevolent dream?" The combination of routine, creative outlets, and unexpected freedoms had a subtle but profound effect. Many women began to shed the immediate bitterness of capture, replaced by curiosity, cautious optimism, and even engagement with camp life. They began to see guards not as faceless enforcers, but as humans navigating their own duties, a realization that would slowly reshape perceptions of what it meant to be on enemy soil. By the end of those first weeks, the German women POWs had begun to adapt, their daily lives filled with experiences both foreign and strangely comforting. The camp had become more than a place of containment. It was a small, self-contained world where the rules of war softened, if only briefly, into something recognizable, almost humane. But even in this haven of order and unexpected kindness, a question lingered. If captivity could feel so comfortable, what else might challenge our expectations, and their beliefs before the war was done. By the third week in camp, the German women POWs began to notice something more unsettling than the abundance of food or neatly made beds. It was the behavior of the Americans themselves. Politeness, order, and even small acts of courtesy clashed violently with everything these women had been taught about the enemy. In Germany, the war had hardened them, trained them to expect cruelty and suspicion at every encounter. Now they were offered choices, treated with respect, and, dare they admit it, sometimes even smiled at. The irony was impossible to ignore. In one memorable anecdote preserved in the camp archives, a group of nurses approached the mess hall to find a guard patiently explaining how to use the self-service coffee machine. The women exchanged astonished glances. One whispered, half joking, "He isn't going to shoot us for taking sugar, is he?" The humor was not just a coping mechanism. It was a lens for processing the sheer dissonance between expectation and reality. Daily interactions with American civilians, engineers, instructors, and volunteers further challenged the POWs' worldview. Language classes brought them into small, polite debates with teachers about customs, holidays, and the peculiarities of American life. Some women were astonished to learn that the guards themselves were often young men barely older than their own brothers, working long hours and living under their own strict routines. The war had painted all Americans as faceless, merciless adversaries. Now they encountered individuals who were human, fallible, even kind. This collision of ideology and reality sparked confusion, curiosity, and, in some cases, quiet admiration. Women wrote letters home describing their disbelief at camp concerts, the abundance of recreational equipment, and the meticulous care with which barracks were maintained. One nurse, recounting her time tending a vegetable garden, wrote, "I had expected only dirt and work. Instead, the soil is rich, the rows straight, and even the weeds are politely removed." The cultural shock extended beyond material comforts. POWs struggled to reconcile their indoctrinated notions of morality and hierarchy with the egalitarian treatment they received. In Germany, women had been conditioned to defer to authority, to expect harsh discipline, and to view the enemy as unyielding. In America, they were encouraged to think, to participate, and even to question gently. Small freedoms, a choice of chores, the ability to attend classes, the opportunity to create art, were both liberating and bewildering. Yet, the humanizing effect of these interactions did not go unnoticed. Some POWs began to see the guards less as captors and more as caretakers of fragile order, bound by duty but capable of empathy. One archival diary entry reads, "We are prisoners, yet they teach us, feed us, laugh with us. I do not understand this, but I do not hate it." Even the humor of a situation became part of their daily reckoning. A group of women, observing a drill where guards march in precise formation, quipped about the Americans' obsession with punctuality. Another noted how seriously the guards took volleyball matches, joking, "If only the war could be decided by who hits the ball hardest." These ironies softened the edges of fear, without diminishing the gravity of captivity. The ideological clash reached its peak during organized vocational training. POWs were encouraged to learn trades and life skills that might aid their reintegration into post-war society. Some nurses attended medical classes. Others learned carpentry or bookkeeping. Many expressed disbelief that the enemy would invest resources in their future. In Germany, one woman reflected, they would have called this propaganda, or worse, trickery. Here it feels genuine. By the end of these weeks, the German women POWs had begun a subtle transformation. Their worldview, shaped by propaganda, scarcity, and the brutality of war, was quietly challenged by the simple, steadfast humanity around them. Comfort, courtesy, and opportunity forced them to question not only the enemy's nature, but also their own assumptions about captivity, loyalty, and survival. And yet, even as they adapted, the women could not shake the feeling that the surprises were far from over. The question lingered, like a shadow in the sunlight. If their captors could show them kindness, what other contradictions awaited in the strange world of American POW camps? As spring turned to summer in 1945, the German women POWs began to understand that their time in the American camps was nearing an end. Repatriation was imminent. Yet the experiences they carried would remain far longer than the weeks spent in tidy barracks and sunlit parade grounds. For many, the memory of warmth, courtesy, and even laughter in captivity was almost surreal, a paradox that challenged decades of expectation and training. Historical records show that by mid-1945, over 370,000 Axis prisoners had returned to Europe, many of them influenced, like these women, by the unexpected humanity of their captors. Letters and oral histories indicate that the American approach, combining strict discipline with genuine care, left a lasting impression. Women who had once expected harsh punishment found themselves reflecting on the small but meaningful gestures. A guard offering extra blankets, a teacher patiently explaining English grammar, or the orderly rows of vegetables they had tended in the garden. These were not acts of propaganda or trickery, but deliberate policy informed by the Geneva Convention and a belief that humane treatment could foster cooperation and reduce unrest. The POWs experiences had a quiet, ironic humor that endured even after their return. One woman later recalled showing her mother the photograph of the camp library, a neatly arranged room with dozens of books and a small piano. Her mother, hardened by wartime suffering, stared incredulously and muttered, "You spent the war reading novels?" The women laughed, recognizing that the juxtaposition of captivity and comfort had created memories that were almost too strange to believe. Beyond the personal, these camps left a subtle imprint on post-war thought and policy. American officers noted that humane treatment of prisoners improved morale, reduced escape attempts, and even created tentative friendships that softened the edges of enmity. For the women themselves, the lessons were more profound. The idea that enemies could be human, that kindness could coexist with authority, and that perception often mattered more than circumstance. These were lessons that shaped the rebuilding of Germany in ways that are difficult to quantify, but deeply felt by those who experienced them firsthand. Many of the women reflected on the transformative power of this unexpected generosity. One nurse wrote in her memoir, "I left not embittered, but bewildered, grateful that even in the shadow of war, humanity could persist." Another recalled the irony of being taught carpentry and bookkeeping skills by Americans who had once been caricatures of the enemy in German propaganda. The dissonance created laughter, disbelief, and eventually a lasting sense of perspective. Even humor had a way of cementing the lessons. Women would reminisce about marching drills where the guards took volleyball matches with the seriousness of generals, or about warm bread so plentiful that they joked it might be a secret test of American ingenuity. These small, ironic moments softened trauma without diminishing the reality of captivity, creating a nuanced memory that was neither entirely bitter nor wholly sweet. As the POWs boarded ships back to Germany, they carried with them more than uniforms and official records. They carried an understanding of contradictions, that captivity could coexist with dignity, that an enemy could show unexpected care, and that survival was sometimes measured not just in endurance, but in the quiet power of kindness. The camps have been a strange, humanizing crucible, reshaping perceptions in ways that even the most rigorous training or propaganda could not. In the end, the story of these women serves as a reminder that war is rarely black and white. Amid the violence and hardship, moment of unexpected humanity can challenge assumptions, provoke reflection, and in rare cases, leave a legacy of empathy. For the German women POWs on American soil, what had begun as disbelief ended in reflection, a lesson in the curious, often ironic, capacity for decency even in the darkest of times. And so, as the ships disappeared over the horizon, the question that had echoed since their arrival lingered. If such kindness could exist amidst conflict, what other possibilities lay beyond the front lines, waiting to surprise even the most wary of hearts?